Hello and welcome to earlymusicsources.com. My name is Elam Otem, and today we'll see how music might survive in an incomplete manner, but then be reconstructed. Very often, music from older times survives only partially, with some part or parts missing. This is especially so in the 16th century, where much of the music was published in or copied into separate part books. It's very easy for one of the books to get lost and leave us with a collection of compositions that lack a part or two. In order to enjoy or examine such incomplete music, one has to first reconstruct the missing parts. In this episode, we will discuss this issue and see how the inner logic of 16th century counterpoint may help a reconstructor bring lost music back to life. Let's start. Until roughly the middle of the 17th century, open scores were not a common way for music to be kept. Instead, sets of separate parts were the way much of the music was preserved. With time, sadly, parts can get lost. Nowadays, surviving music sources are kept in libraries all across the world. If we are lucky, a complete set of parts of the collection we are interested in may be found in one library. If we are less lucky, some parts are found in one library and some in other libraries. And if we are even more unlucky, some of the parts might be completely missing. Research looking into this issue systematically is still ongoing, but from the available catalog of anthologies of printed music from the 16th and 17th centuries, circa 21% of the publications survived in an incomplete form, of which 13% of the sources are missing 3 or more parts, and thus their content can be considered lost for the time being. But 8% are missing only 1 or 2 parts. These have the potential of being reconstructed. There are many caveats concerning these numbers, and hopefully more accurate studies will be published in due course. But the picture is nevertheless clear. A large number of musical sources are incomplete, but for some of them there is hope of being brought to life to a certain extent by means of reconstruction. Reconstructing a missing part of a polyphonic fabric may be analogous to the process often employed in graphic art restoration, in those cases where the original is severely damaged. An historical object is incomplete, and we, people from a period far from the object's period, have the task of completing its missing parts in a way that would be agreeable with the original, both generally with its style and also specifically with its particular features. This demands research and deep understanding of how the original object was made. When it's done poorly, even non-experts can instantly tell that something is wrong. Anyway, while graphic art restoration is mostly final and includes the risk of permanently damaging the work, restoration of a lost part in music is just a suggestion. You may take it, improve it, perform it, or ignore it altogether. Even if a music restoration project is not perfect, and there is no way to know whether it is, it may still give us some access to music which is otherwise regarded as lost, and is thus ignored by scholars, musicians, and audiences. Of course, reconstructing lost parts is not an easy task. Let's see what it might look like. When reconstructing an incomplete source, it would be best if it is by a composer from whom we have several complete publications. The more complete material we have, the better chances we have to learn and follow the personal style of the composer in question. Being very diligent, we might then do some dry exercises by taking fully surviving pieces by this composer, if possible from the same period and genre, hiding one part, trying to reconstruct it, and then compare it with the real part. In this process, we would learn a lot, and thereby increase our chances for a better reconstruction when dealing with real missing parts. As opposed to popular composers whose music was copied and reprinted many times and thus more commonly survived, it is often the case that incomplete sources are by those composers who were not very popular, Less popular means fewer or no reprints, which means a lower survival rate. And so, if we were to reconstruct, for example, the missing tenor part from Girolamo dalla Casa's second book of madrigals from 1590, we have a problem, as there are no pieces by him that survived fully with all the parts. In our diligent research, we would have to find surviving pieces which are close in style to that of Dalla Casa, and learn from them about how we might reconstruct our lost part. But regardless of the fine details of the personal style of a composer, there are many other things that can help us. Much of the polyphonic music of the 16th century has basic logic and coherence. If we understand it, we may be able to narrow our options when reconstructing a lost part, sometimes to a very high degree of certainty. Let's see. First, we would need to know what the general range of the missing part is. This is mostly obvious, but not always. To narrow the range of our reconstruction even more, we should know what exact clef our missing voice had, as very often the ranges were linked to the limits of the staff. In the second half of the 16th century, there were commonly two sets of clefs for the four primary voices, so-called normal clefs and high clefs. So if, for example, we lack a tenor part, and the other parts seem to be a set of high clefs, we know that our tenor's clef would most probably be a C3 clef, and its range will be determined accordingly. Now comes the fun part, finding out what exact notes and rests our lost part had. Of course, reconstructing a lost part is essentially composing, and as such, a reconstructor should have skills similar to those a composer from the relevant period would have had. However, apart from the many ways a part may be composed, simply based on whim and the period's rules of counterpoint, there are some progressions that have very limited options and may be used as anchors by a reconstructor. A musical moment which is very important and very standardized in Renaissance polyphony is the cadence. So this might be a good place to start. By checking which of the cadential components is clearly missing in a certain cadence, you may recover some notes of the lost parts. For example, in this cadence from a madrigal by Philippe Verdelot, I am now hiding the top part, imagining that it is lost. We see that the tenor is taking the tenorizans, the bass is taking the bassizans, but we are lacking our cantizans, and clearly some of the harmonies are too empty. Having such a cadence without a cantizans is extremely unlikely, so we can be pretty sure that our missing soprano was taking the cantizans. The cantizans would be a major sixth above the tenorizans on F sharp, and would typically include a prepared dissonance a step above it. Now we seem to lack only two notes in order to complete this short homophonic cadence. Here you might have several options, but the neatest one, which fits Verdelot's style the best, simply makes parallel sixths with the tenor. Here is another cadence from the same piece. This time I'll hide the tenor part from you. This seems to be a cadence to C, the alto taking the tenorizans and the bass the bassizans. Clearly, again, the cantizans has to be there. It almost certainly should be taken by the missing tenor. Perhaps something like this. Interestingly, checking what Verdelot actually composed here, we see that he started the tenor one minim after the other voices. This is an example of something that is perhaps hard to guess, but our version wasn't that far off. Of course, in other cases, you may lack other cadential components, for example here, where the tenorizans is missing. Making the tenor play the tenorizans, ED, would make our tenor higher than the alto. If I am unsure about it, I would browse the four-part repertoire of Verdelot and see how common it is for him to have the tenor going above the alto. Since I know that it is definitely something that can happen in the music of Verdelot, I feel very secure in placing it there and try to complete the notes before as well. Imitations are a central feature of 16th and 17th century counterpoint and can be found pretty much everywhere. When we are reconstructing a missing part, understanding how imitations were used may be very useful. Let's have a look at Victoria's motet Doctor Bonus and imagine that its bass is missing. We see that the soprano starts and that the alto and tenor have some rests before they enter. We can assume that our missing bass also has rests. We just need to find out where it should enter. If we look closely, we see that the soprano entrance is followed by that of the altos, and that they have a little duo together until the entrance of the tenor. We also see that the tenor line is identical to that of the soprano for no less than 5.5 bars. Could it be that this portion was composed using the typical repeated duos technique which we mentioned in past episodes? That the soprano-alto duo is repeated by the tenor and bass? Let's try to replicate the alto melody in the bass and see if it fits. Well, yes, it does. Right after this, we can recognize a cantizans to G in the tenor part. The soprano and alto are not playing any cadential components, which means that a tenorizans is the missing component and it must be taken by our bass part. Now, only one short note is missing, but there are not many options. It must be a B. As you see, understanding the various ways compositions are made is key if we want to join the workshop in which polyphony is made. As a last example, we will look at another motet by Victoria, Magi viderunt stella, imagining that the alto part is missing, and see what we can deduce from the other voices. Here we see a clear subject which is imitated between the voices, 4 times on G and 1 time on D. Looking for places where we can put our subject in the alto, we see that if we put it on D, always 2 bars after another entrance, it fits perfectly. Looking ahead, for more clear subjects which are imitated in several voices, we see this one. It's a typical stretto fuga, and our missing alto can be the one to start it. Later on, we see this little motive, which is imitated and can be played in the alto as well. Furthermore, we see 2 tenor cadences that both lack a cantizans. They must be taken by our missing alto. And so we can continue, looking for encores made by imitations and cadential components. We'll end up with a part which is partially restored, with a few gaps that still have to be filled. These gaps cannot be completed with the same confidence as the other parts, but since the important things seem to be in place, if we follow Victoria's contrapuntal conventions, we have a decent chance of arriving at a result that would not have offended anyone from the period. In a future episode, we will reconstruct together a missing voice from a 5-part motet by Orlando Gibbons. For now, I want to briefly share with you some other interesting points related to music reconstruction. We were talking mainly about the problem of missing part books, but sometimes there are sources which come down to us simply in a bad state, where some portions are simply illegible. For example, in this manuscript of a Mass by Brummel, which is written in a choir book format where the different voices are laid out on different parts of the same page, we see that some portions are completely corrupt. When reconstructing a piece in such a state, you need not only to consider all the things we mentioned up until now, but also the physical and calligraphical aspects. Namely, you need to make sure that your reconstruction fits into the available space on the page. In such early repertoires, there are other aspects, this time more music related, which may help reconstructors. For example, many pieces were based on a cantus firmus, a Gregorian chant or other pre-existing melody that was used in one way or another in one or more parts. If we know this cantus firmus, and we know that it must be there somewhere, we might be already closer to finding the missing notes. Another important composition technique at that time was the use of strict canons. In many cases, a part may be derived from another part, following a certain canon technique. Knowing all the possibilities that were relevant to the period may be crucial to finding this out. When looking at sources from the 16th century, we are blessed with countless instrumental intabulations of vocal pieces. If a vocal piece is missing a part, there is a good chance that it survived in the form of an intabulation, an instrumental arrangement for lute or harpsichord, for example. This might be very helpful for the process of reconstruction. Sometimes repetitions of entire portions may help us recover a lost voice. In pieces for two choirs, such as this Ave Maria by Victoria, this is very common. If one of those parts had been lost, it would be rather easy to recover large portions of it thanks to these repetitions. In repertoires from the early 17th century, there may be other features that may help us reconstruct a lost part. For example, in this instrumental canzona for 4 parts and basso continuo by Giovanni Battista Riccio, awkward rests in the soprano suggest that the composer used the echo effect, which was very popular at the time. If this is true, it is extremely likely that the missing alto part was something like this. Other important hints for reconstruction in the early 17th century might be found in the figures of basso continuo parts. In this other piece by Riccio, for example, looking for a line that follows and expresses the basso continuo figures, we get a very convincing result that includes a short stretto fuga and follows the shape of the following soprano entrance. In the third bar, we see a little cadence where the bass takes a cantizans. A tenorizans is thus called for in our missing alto part. Both of Riccio's examples are taken from the studies of Marina Toffetti, a scholar who recently has been promoting and encouraging the reconstruction of incomplete sources. In the last few years, some reconstructed parts have become obsolete as the originals resurfaced. It's of course wonderful when this happens, but being realistic, many sources will stay incomplete. And we can decide whether we want to do something about it and learn something in the process or just ignore those sources. This was our episode about part restoration. We hope you enjoyed it. As announced, in a future episode we will reconstruct together a beautiful motet that lacks one voice. It'll be fun. Don't forget to check the special page on our website with all the footnotes and other extra information. If you enjoy early music sources, feel free to support us on Patreon. Comment, share, and like. See you next time at earlymusicsources.com.